Good morning, everybody. So this is where we want to end up with this lesson that we've already built in lesson 5, the basic foundation or structure for our page. On Tuesday, we started building the nav bar by incorporating a bootstrap element into this. And now we're in the process of applying CSS styles or cascading style sheet, selectors to this to make it look less generic and customize the colors and the properties to what we want. And you'll notice, since we're working on the nav bar, that what we want to add, and we'll be doing this right today, is this hover state. That when you hover over this, hover over the links, you can see how the background gradient changes and the color of the text changes too. It's subtle, but when you do it, you'll see in the normal state, it's a light yellow text. And when we hover over it, it's white. So we're going to focus on that, and we should be able to start and get going with the header and styling it as well, and incorporating basic elements for that. So this is where we left off right here. Now, what I want to do, and something that I forgot to do the other day, is I need to add a background gradient. Now, if you're wondering why do you want a solid color and a gradient as well, is that sometimes with older browsers, they don't work well with CSS3. And it was with CSS3 that gradients is one of the things that was added. Then it wouldn't display any kind of background color. It would default to the background of white. And you don't want to see that. So we have this default background color here. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the row.navbar default. I'm going to click over here to background, and you'll see that we added that background color. And then below, you can see where we can add a gradient. Well, that's what I want to do now, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a gradient to that. It's very subtle. I'm going to go ahead and click right here. This little dialog box pops up. So what I want to do to the top color up here, and I have to look myself. See, this should be, let me switch to hexadecimal numbers here. And I want 069 for that. So that's going to be 069. Okay, so that's that deep blue. And then in the bottom color down here, what we're going to do is we're going to use 08A. 08A. Okay, very subtle little gradient. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add that to my gradient here. And now I can go back and I can click off of that. And you can see that it's a very subtle change, but it goes from dark to light. The other thing that I forgot to mention, to make sure, at least for right now, is that you want to make sure that the angle is set here, because you can change the angle of the gradient. It's set by default to 180 degrees. So it goes from top to bottom, dark to light right now. And then when we create the hover state for our buttons or links, then when we hover over those links, and it will flip and go in the opposite direction, which is nice, and it's fairly common feature that you add, visual feature. So I've added that. Now let's come down here to the next selector that we made, and styling. And you can see that we already have a hover state. It goes from a light gray to a black, and we're going to be changing that soon. But there are basically 4 states to buttons or links, and the 2 that we want to change is number 1, make this an A link. So you don't need link, but it makes it more specific when you do that. And we're also going to apply the same appearance to this to visited links. Typically, when you go to do a Google search or something like that, and you put in a search for something, and you find a whole slew of links that will take you to that search that you've applied. That once you go to those, click on those links and you come back to your original Google search page, oftentimes you'll find that there's a change in the color of the links that you clicked on. Well, that is what happens with a visited link. Now, we could have a visited link have a different color, but for a very limited website like ours, it has 6, 7, 8 pages. You really don't need that. It's only when you have a whole page of links that you'll forget which links you had already gone to. So I'm going to change the name of this first. I'm going to make it a little bit more specific. And I'm going to name that A, and I'm going to put colon link. And I'm going to hit return twice. Okay. So that's made that more specific. And now I also want to apply it to another link, the visited link. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click in here and I'm going to double click. So the whole thing is highlighted, and I'm going to copy the whole thing. And then after a link, I'm going to put a comma and a space, and then I'm going to paste. And instead of a link, it's going to be a visited. So that will apply it to both states. Okay, visited. Hit the return key twice. There we go. So we already assigned to the border colors to the top and to the right. Okay, colors to the left and the bottom. Okay, to create this illusion of a three-dimensional, and it doesn't look that three-dimensional at the moment, but it will shortly. It will look more like these. Okay, so now what we're ready to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the color of the text. So that would be the first thing that I probably want to do. Let me check here. Let's see. So I changed the visited. I'm checking the textbook to make sure I go in order, because if I don't, then sometimes we can run into issues. So I'm going to go ahead and, for this state, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the text. And right now, no color has been specified. And that's a part of the CSS, or the inheritance process, that by default, it's already taking on the default characteristics. And what we want to do is now override that. So for the color of the text, we want something a little bit more visible. So I'm going to use FFC. That's that light yellow color. When I do that, you can see how that pops a little bit better and makes it look a little, a little bit nicer. So now what we want to do is we want to change the hover state. And so what I want to do is I'm going to add a new selector here. And I want it to be, I don't need container, but I do want row. Okay, so it's going to be .row .navbarNav. And then what I want to do is, instead of default, I don't want it to be default. I'm going to put, as I've done here, I'm going to put the right caret, and I'm going to put list item, and then I'm going to put space, and then I'm going to put the right caret, and I'm going to put a colon hover. Okay, H-O-V-E-R. Whoops, not Homer, hover. Okay, and I'll go ahead and I'll put return key twice. So now what I want to do is I want to change the color of the text, and I want to change the background color. I'm leaving the border properties the same. So what I'll do first for the color of the text is I'm going to select that and I'll make it white. So since I don't have a white up here, I'll make it, I want it to be, and that is FFF. Let me go back here. Let me go ahead and add that to my color palette here. Now you don't see that, but when I hover over it, You should see it. Okay. So let me make sure that the name is correct. So let me go back here and check. So I want to type, I want row, nav bar, nav. Yeah, no, see, I messed up. And where I messed up is if I'm looking at the top one here, I forgot I have row, nav bar, and I want nav bar, nav. So hold on. I want hyphen, nav. So it's also, you know, as I'm goofing up here, it's also important that every time you add a selector like this, okay, that we test it. And now it works. Again, it's a very subtle change, but I'll be able to tell even better in a minute when I add the gradient in the background. But when I hover over this, it changes from that yellow to white. It's a subtle little change at the moment. So with the hover one selected, I'm going to select the background. Okay, and let's add a gradient to this. We don't need to add a background color because that inherits the last one. And I want to apply this one, but I'm going to change the degree to 0. So I want that to be 0. Let's put that in there. Instead of 2.7, I want it to be 0. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply that. Let's see if it works. If I hover over it, and you can see, there we go. Very cool. So for each step of the way, I make sure that I test and make sure that it works, make sure that I've named my selector correctly, and make sure that the properties that I've applied work. Because if they don't, and I wait too long to make those changes or to test, then what will happen is that it will be more and more difficult as time passes to troubleshoot and to figure out what's going on here. Okay. So next thing that we need to do is we need to center these links. Okay. So to do that, we need to create another selector for that. So this is going to be .row, .navbar nav. Okay. Like that. And then for the property under that, we are going to change the layout and we're going to slide it over a tad. So I'm going to go ahead and add a brand new selector. You know, I mean, I could select this first and that would be helpful, but I don't have to. I mean, I can go ahead and since I'm following the text, so I want .row. So that, and what you might notice if you haven't noticed already is it goes from general to specific. It's already specific and then it's targeting a row, but which row is it targeting? It's targeting the nav bar. And later on, we will do the one for the header and the footer and the main content. So it knows, the rule knows which, you know, which role to target. So I'm going to put in .row. I want navbar nav, not navbar navbar. And I don't want default. No, I don't want any of this. Let me just select it all and delete it. There we go. We'll just hit .row space .navbar navbar hyphen nav. And I think that will be it. That's what we want. Navbar nav. Okay, row dot navbar nav. I want nav. Oh, hold on here. I'm missing something here. Let me go back in here. So I want nav bar. Hold on. .nav. There we go. I'm missing. I knew I was missing something. .nav. dot nav bar nav. Okay. Okay. Let me see, I may have goofed the others. They are working, but I want to make sure that they are working correctly. So, you know what? I did. I goofed. So I want these. I'm going to go all the way back and make sure that these, they're working at the moment, but it should be dot nav. So let me rename these a little bit. Dot nav bar. Nope, see, that was wrong. Let me go back. So that was wrong. So these are correct. So I want this one to be row dot nav bar nav dot nav bar nav. So let me try it and let's see if I got the name right. Because if I don't, like I say, if I type it wrong. So now what I'm going to do is go under layout, and I'm going to click here under layout, and I want the width, okay, to be in pixels. And when that's what you want by default, that it totally screws it up because we have 0 pixels here. But now what I want to do is I want to use the little finger slider here to increase the width of this, okay. Keep going here. And as I keep adding, know that I'm getting close. See that it's gradually coming up here to the 1. And as I add more here, okay, I need to put 715 is what I want. I'm going to use the book rather than do this from memory or by chance. So let's put in 715, hit the tab key, and that fits that, okay? So I'm going to make sure that my name is correct, and we have dot row dot nav bar nav. Yeah, so that's correct. Okay. So the next thing that we need to do is, once I put 715, is that under margins, and we'll scroll down here to margins, we're going to use the shorthand method. We're going to use 0 pixels, and that would mean 0 for the top and 0 for the bottom. The way that the margins and the padding work is that it starts at the top and then it goes clockwise. So I go 0 at the top, and then the right, the bottom, and the left. If I put in shorthand 0 and auto, then that means it will be 0 for the top, 0 for the bottom, and then auto for the left and auto for the right. So I'll put in 0 pixels, 0 px, and then space auto, if I can spell correctly here. The tab key. Okay, so I've changed that. So not much is changing at the moment. And so what we need to do a little bit further here is we need to add, and we're going to come under the bottom here, we're going to add more here. And this is where, you know, it helps to know, and I'm going to click here and I'm going to put under more, I'm going to type float. Hit the tab key, and in here we want none. And notice what happens. We needed that float none in order for that to be centered. Now, as you begin to add links to your browser or remove them, it will alter the center of this. So in order to change that, we do need to go back to the width. And watch what happens when I move this now. If I move over that 715 and I get the little finger icon, I can click and I move it to the right, or I can move it to the left. And what you do is you slide it back and forth until you hit that happy medium. Now, 710 would work too, but I'm going to go back to the 715 that we had here. Okay, and that's nicely centered. You'll notice that everything is working nicely here. So we're in good shape. Now would be a good time to save everything, and I mean everything. Okay, and then the next step is that we're going to start to work on the header and get it to work and to make it look like the one that I showed you, the finished version. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure that I save everything. If I just select save as, or if I select, you notice that save is grayed out, but if I select save as and save it with the same file name, it will save the HTML, but it will not save the style sheet. So what I want to do is I want to save all to make sure that the changes that I've made in my style sheet have been saved as well. So there we go. So the next thing that we want to do, as you'll notice, is before I begin working on the header, is that I need to remove some of the, you'll notice that there's some pixels at the bottom here that are there. If I click in here in the nav bar, or rather the header, there's still some pixels up here that need to be removed so that the nav bar fits really nice and tight. So to do that, I need to make another selector. So this is going to be .row.navbar. So it affects the entire navbar. So .row space .navbar. And what I need to do now is I need to change the bottom margin, just the bottom. And even though by default it says 0, you have to put that in manually to tighten that up. And now you'll notice that that fixed that gap between the bottom of my nav bar and the next row has been tightened up. So now we have none there. So that was one more thing that I need to do before I move on with the header content. Okay. So now we're ready to add content to my header. So if I click inside here where it says header, column small 12, I can either add that by going into the split view, and I can add an H2 tag if I wish, or I can, in the textbook says I can go to insert, and I don't want to insert a bootstrap component, but I want to add an HTML, okay? And you'll notice that I have heading, an H2 heading. That's the size that they've designated for us for our green start. But we can go ahead and do it from here, and then I'm going to undo it, and then I'll show you how to do it manually, whichever works best for you. Sometimes it's a little bit, takes a little bit more time. It's a little bit more cumbersome to use these insert features, and it's easier just to type in the code yourself when you become more familiar with it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. I want to nest it inside that div. Okay, and you'll notice that it shows. Okay, there we go. So what I want to do is I want to edit that. To edit that, to use the word green start, you simply click inside it, and it changes from that blue to the orange, and the orange box allows us to highlight this and edit it. So now I can put in green start. Okay. And now what I want to do, because the row beneath it, which is going to read green awareness and action, if I just hit the return key, notice in the code view, it automatically added a paragraph. When you hit the when you're adding text and you hit the return key, it automatically adds a P tag. We already have a paragraph. So let me show you here, instead of just using that space in here, I'm going to go ahead and go in code view, and I'm going to put caps lock on, and I'm going to write green awareness. Whoops. No, I thought I put caps lock on. There we go. Green awareness in action. See, I can't type. There we go. So it adds it from there. And I could have done that up here as well. Okay. because by default it added when I inserted the H2, I could have done that. I could have done that from here as well in the code view. It's up to you. Anyway, we have our basic text here. So now what we need to do is we need to style it. So we're going to start by styling the green start, which is our H2 tag. And we want it centered, and we want to change it green, and we want to change the font. So there's a variety of things that we need to do. So, but to do that, again, we need to create a rule under our CSS designer. Okay, come on. Let's highlight in here. Let's highlight the H2. Make sure that My Green Styles is selected. You also probably want to make sure that global is selected as well. And now what I want to do is I want to create a brand new rule for this. And this will be header, because that's, again, we go from general to specific. So if I were to come down here and I were to select the header, that's everything. So it applies to any H2 tag that's contained inside the header. And then after that is row. And then after that would be our header H2. So here we go. So I'm going to highlight the green start here, the H2 tag, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new selector down here. So I want it header.row, header.row, and then I want it to be applied to any H2 tag. And now I go ahead and I hit the return key twice. And now I've added a new rule. So now what I can do is I can apply a color to this. So we can start by going to text, and we can apply a color. And I want a nice bright green applied to that. So this will be 0F0 that we're going to apply to that. So I'm going to go to 0F0. How do I know that it's 0F0? Because the book tells me. If you didn't know that otherwise, what you would do is you could go to Photoshop and, or you can dial in the colors as you need, or you can just click anywhere in the space bar here, as long as you have, or the color picker, as long as you have hexadecimal numbers, and it will automatically, wherever you click in here, it will give you the appropriate hexadecimal number. So for example, if I were to click in here like so, and highlight that is the color that I wanted, that kind of deep avocado green, notice that it's giving me the hexadecimal number for it. Well, I want it to be that really bright one down here, the 0F0. Now, if you're wondering, when it says hexadecimal, that means six numerals or 6 numbers. So you'll notice that some of them are repeated. It's 00FF00. Well, anytime you have duplicates like that, you can abbreviate and just put 0F0 and it'll know which to get. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add that to my color picker. And I'm going to click OK. And notice that it's changed color. So that's what we want. The next step is to assign under text. We're going to select the font family. And you'll notice that there's a lot of different families that we have here. And we're going to create our own custom family in a little bit. Now, the reason you have to pick a font family, we're going to start with impact. And you'll notice that it changed it. But if I go back and I look at those, you're going to see that there's a whole bunch of them under here. There's impact, there's Hofstadter, there's Franklin Gothic, there's that's Franklin Gothic Bold, there's Arial Black, and then sans serif. The reason that you need to select font families is that you have to remember that these pages are rendered in a browser. The browser is located on someone's personal computer. It's not in the cloud somewhere. Their personal computer may not have the font that you specified. So in the event that their computer doesn't have the font that you specified, then it will jump to the next one. So if it doesn't have impact, which is a very common typeface, then it's going to look for And if it doesn't find Hofstadter, then it's going to look for Franklin Gothic. If it doesn't find Franklin Gothic, then it's going to go to Arial Black. If it can't find that, then it's going to go to whatever default sans serif typeface that has been specified. Okay, so there we go. We changed the font. Okie doke. So we've applied our specific color. We've applied our specific font or font family. And now what we want to do is we want to change the size of it. So let's go to font size, and we're going to use percentages instead. And notice how it disappeared. And that's kind of a good thing, because when it goes to default 0% and it disappears, it knows that the a selector that we have created is affecting what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 350%, make it a little bit bigger. So there we go. And now we want to add a drop shadow to this so that against our background that we're creating, it will look a little bit nicer. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here, and you'll notice that we have text shadow. So now we need to assign all the proper attributes to that. So H shadow, meaning the height, we want 0. V, we want 5 pixels. So we're going to measure that in pixels. And there's something that I forgot to mention in a minute here. So we're going to go pixels, and we want, let's see, 5 pixels. There we go. And we want the blur to be 5 pixels. So it's a little bit soft. It's not a hard edge. And then we want the color to be black. Okay, so we'll pick black for that color. Okay, oh, come on. There we go. And you'll notice that a nice drop shadow has been added. It gives us some depth, but it's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go back into the color again. And this is where I'm going to switch from hexadecimal to Rgba. And the reason that I do that is that what we can do is, remember, one of the features of CSS3 is we can change the opacity. By default, the opacity is set to 1, which is 100%. I want it to be 40%. So I put in 0.4. Notice that we've done that, and I click in here. And notice that it's a little bit softer. We have a nice soft edge. It's 40%. And then, so it still helps it to pop from the background, but it's not as, I don't know, kind of horsey, I guess would be the word that I would use, kind of overbearing, cumbersome. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to center it right now. So let's go ahead here and text align center, make sure that that's centered. And then the next thing that we're going to do, if we look at the finished version here, we can see that the word start is in white. So we have to create another rule in order to do that. So to do that, what we do is we're going to highlight the text. Okay. And inside here, where the word start is, I'm going to, by hand, I'm going to insert, I could do it with a tag editor, which is what the book wants, but I could put it, what I want to do is I'm going to put in a span tag. So with that highlighted, I'm going to hit Command T. Okay. And then what I want it to do is to wrap it in here, and I'm going to put in span. Okay. I'm putting in a span tag. I go ahead and I hit return. And you'll notice in the code view, a span tag has been added. So now when I select the text, like so, you'll notice up here with the box selected, it has the word span. Now I can add a custom selector for that so that I can apply white to only that text that has been added a span tag. And I'm going to name it logo white. Okay, logo white. And I'm going to hit the return key. Okay. And now let's come over here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new selector. And I'm going to name it. I don't, because it is so specific, I only need dot logo white, and that's it. The dot, the period in front of everything is for a specific class that I've been adding. So there's logo white. Now I can come back in with the text tool, and for color, I can change that to white. And there we go. Now we have our white. So pretty cool. You know, slow but sure, we're adding and customizing. And every time you want to customize and make a change, depending on how specific you want, you're going to have to add another selector for that. And the span tag that we created for the logo is a perfect example. Okay. So the next step is to now focus on the text that we have down here. So we have to, again, for the header and the paragraph tag we have down here, okay, we're going to add another rule. And again, it's going to be specified to the header.row P. So again, any paragraph tag that exists inside the header will have these attributes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add another selector. And it's going to be header space dot row. Nope, sorry. Well, let me leave it there because I don't think it will work. It should be header dot row P. But let me go ahead and I'm going to put a space in there just to show you what happens when it doesn't work. So I'm going to put a space, hit the return key twice. And now when I move the mouse over it, notice that it doesn't highlight in blue. Again, if you recall from last Tuesday, I told you that when you move the mouse over the selector, like when I move the mouse over the for example, the header.row H2, notice that the entire background highlights in blue. Well, that's what you want to see. When I move over the specific class that I created for logo white, notice that the background highlights in blue. But when I go over the one for the paragraph, it doesn't highlight. So I've made a mistake. And I could go ahead and I can apply those changes, but you would not see them. Now watch what happens when I remove that space and I hit the return key twice. Okay. Now when I hover over it, it highlights in blue. That's what I want to see. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to start making some changes for all of these things. So what we're going to do is start by changing the font family for this. So for everything that we want to change, we have to apply it to that rule. So we're going to start by changing the font family, and we're going to use, let's find the font family. And I want the one that we're going to use, Lucida Grande, is the one that I want. So it's right here. Right here. There we go. So that changes that appearance. But we want it to be bold. So I'll go ahead and under font style, I'm going to select, nope, not that. My bad. Let me go back again. Font weight. There we go. Bold. Okay. So we have font bold. So that's a little bit bolder now. Want to make sure that it's centered. So under the alignment, I'm going to select centered so that it's directly underneath the green start. Notice that you don't have many options for aligning your text. You have flush left, centered, flush right, and justified, and that's pretty much it. And then if you want to move it over a bit, then you have to create a custom rule for that, okay? The next step is that we're going to create a drop shadow for it. And then the last thing that we'll do is we'll change the color for it. But let's go ahead and add the drop shadow first. So again, for the H part of the shadow, the height is going to be 0. The V part is going to be a little bit smaller than what we had for our header. It's going to be 3 pixels. Okay. We want the color, again, or the blur to be the same. It'll be 5 pixels. So let's go ahead in here and change the color, the size of the blur to, maybe I can just, I don't want it 8 pixels. Sometimes it's hard to click in here and to find get it to work. And then the color, again, we're going to use what we had before. We want it black, but we don't want it 100%. We want it to be 40%. So I'll put in 0, and then for the, instead of 1, and then 4.40. So there we go. So it's, you know, it's not overpowering. Now when I change the color of it from black to white, we'll be able to see it. Okay, so I'll change it from black to white. And then the very last thing that we need to do is that we're going to change the overall letter spacing of it so that it stretches out a little bit. So what I want to do next is I want to go, oh, I missed it here. Oh, I already did. I messed up, sort of. I want to go to letter spacing. So let's find that here. Letter spacing right here. And we're going to change that to 0.5 ems. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to ems. That's down here, M. Okay, and I'm going to change it to 0.5. So come in here and put in 0.5 ems. Okay. And notice it stretches it out a little bit. Now, I was going to say about percentages and ems, that instead of specifying a fixed size, oftentimes with text, especially text, in web design, it's useful, more prudent to use percentages or ems, which are proportionate. So depending on the screen size that your website is being viewed on, it will shrink to a certain percentage of the size that it's of that screen that you're viewing it on. If the normal size on a tablet is a certain percentage, then, or pixel size, then it will use, by using percentages, it will automatically scale it to the correct, or I won't say correct, but it will look more appropriate, especially for the phone. If you specified a certain number of pixels, and it would remain that pixel size on a smartphone, it would probably look too large. But if you use the percentage on that smartphone, then it would shrink down to fit and look appropriate in its size. So we're going to get started now with the background images for this. And then, which will be using a fern and a background color. And we won't be able to finish it today, but we will, we're on our way to, getting a really kind of elegant looking background or header for our piece. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that everything is saved. So I'm going to go ahead and select File, Save All. Okay. And now we're ready to add some other properties to this. So we're going to work in the header here, and we want header.row. Okay. And we're going to add, let's see, we're going to increase the height of this a bit. So I'm going to add padding to the top and the bottom. Okay. So I'm going to come back over here, and we had header.row for the paragraph, but we want not just the paragraph, but the entire header to be affected. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new selector, and it's going to be header.row. Hit the return key twice. I'll go back and click on it. Okay. Notice that it highlights the whole thing in blue. That's good. And now what we want to do for layout is in the padding down here. What we're going to do is we're going to add, and we can use the shorthand. If you don't want to use shorthand and you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can do it manually. So what I wanted, but I can go ahead and I can put 20 at the top, 20 at the bottom, and 0 left and 0 right. So, but I'm going to use the shorthand. So click here, and I'm going to put 20 pixels, 20 px, and I'm going to put space, and then I'm going to put 0 pixels, 0 px, and then hit the tab key. You'll notice as soon as I do that, it adds some spacing to that padding. Okay, so let's make sure that I did that right. Yeah, I had added the padding. So I have header.row. Okay. And it added some padding to the top, but I don't want that there. Let's see, let's make sure that I got this right. We'll find out in a minute when we add our background image. Okay, so we'll find out in a second. Yeah, it's right, because I have my text here for the H2 and the paragraph. And then there's space above and space below. So now what I'm ready to do is to add a background image to our header. So what we're going to do, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky, and this is where I mess up oftentimes, is that we're going to come back and we're going to make sure that header.row is selected, and we're going to go to background, and we're going to go ahead and we can go ahead and add a background image. So instead of the gradient, I'm going to go ahead and where it says background image, I'm going to click on this little folder right here. Come on. And you'll notice that it automatically jumps to that image folder that we specified for our root folder. And so I'm going to select ping, or the fern ping. And the reason that it is a ping is because we have surrounding that fern, we have transparency. Okay, so I'll select it. And you'll notice that by default, it automatically repeats, and background images by default will repeat until they fill the entire background. Well, what we want to do is we want to select from here where it says background repeat. I'm going to select the right one where it only selects one. So now we have just a single image. But what we want to do now under the size for that is that we want for the background positioning and the background size is that we're going to do the following. So I selected that background field. So we selected the default. Now I'm going to click and I'm going to drag the setting. Let's see. This is where I get goofed up because it's never clear to me. I want, let's go ahead and under background position, I'm going to click here and I'm going to put 47%. Okay. Okay. So that should be for the position property. Then the next is what we need to do is we need to apply some other effects. But before I do that, I need to affect the scale. So let's change the height of that. Let's change the background size. So let's change the height. Come on. I don't want it to be auto. I want it to be in percentage. So if I come back over here, I use percentage, that shrinks to nothing. That's good. Now let's go ahead and change this to, and it should be about, the height size should be about, let's say 80%. That seems too big. So maybe this one should be should be auto. So I'm going to change this one. I'm going to go back and undo that. And I'm going to change this one to percentage. And I want the background size here to be 80%. And I want this one to be auto. Let's put in auto. And let's change this to 80%. And that's still not quite right. So let's change that to 80%. That shrink, there we go. Got it. So now we have the ferns centered, and we have our text. And now we're ready to add background colors to all of this. So again, to allow for browsers that can't accommodate CSS3, what we want to do is put in a generic background color. So under our background color, I'm going to put 090. So let's switch to hexadecimal, which is kind of a deep green, 090. There we go. And I think I've already added it, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add it again. There we go. So we've added our background color. Let's say how we're doing on time. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this a whirl to finish up today, because this might take a little bit longer than, you know what, maybe I should just stop for today. Because what I want to do is I want to add a background image, and which is the stripe, and that will take a little bit longer to do. But we've come a long way today. We've styled and customized our nav bar. Okay. In our header, you'll notice that we've added an image. We've customized the text that's inside the header. It's working very nicely. We added a span tag so that we could be even more specific about the color of the H2 tag that we added. We also added specific style to the paragraph tag that we have inside our header. And again, if we added an H2 tag anywhere else outside of the header, or a paragraph tag anywhere else outside of our header, they would not have these attributes. They're only applied to text inside the header itself. So if we were to add another H2 tag inside the header, it would have these attributes. If we wanted them to have different attributes, we would have to create another class for it, just as we did for the span tag for the start image. So on Tuesday, we will finish this up, and we should be able to finish up really the rest of this and finish up lesson 6. We'll be able to move on to lesson 7. After we finish lesson 7, then you will publish it and you will get points for publishing it and completing lessons 1 through 7. I will assume that you did all of them by being able to publish it. If you can't publish it, then that's kind of an indication to me that you haven't done them. Before we leave today, we have a few more minutes. Are there any questions from any of you about what I've covered? No? Let me pause. And I'm just gonna, you guys are free to leave. I'm gonna say goodbye for now. And I'm going to pause the recording and see everybody next Tuesday where we will finish up lesson 6. Okay. That's it. Bye-bye.